told me to cover the Strait of Hormuz. I almost said no. Then February 28th happened. The strait closed, and suddenly people in my own neighborhood in Norfolk, Virginia, were paying prices at the pump that made no sense. My neighbor Linda, retired schoolteacher, fixed income, called me crying. She couldn't afford to fill her tank to get to her doctor's appointment. That's when I understood. This wasn't a story about a faraway place on a map. This was a story about all of us, and I had to go see it myself. I've covered Hurricane Katrina from a borrowed canoe. I sat in Fallujah with a broken satellite phone. I thought I understood what it felt like to stand at the edge of the world. Nothing prepared me for floating in the Strait of Hormuz and realizing that the narrow strip of dark blue water around me was the single most consequential piece of geography on the entire planet. 21 miles wide at its tightest point. And through it, every single day, flows 20 million barrels of oil. 21% of everything the world burns to keep its lights on, plus 17% of global liquefied natural gas, all of it squeezed through one corridor that a determined adversary could shut down before breakfast. That number on your gas pump the last time you filled up, that is a direct report from this place. Delivered silently. Every time you slide your card and wait for the click. I grew up in Norfolk, Navy Town. The largest naval station in the world is right there. I grew up watching warships move through the Chesapeake Bay as a background fact of daily life, the way other kids grow up watching commuter trains. My grandfather served on a destroyer in the Pacific in World War II. When I was about 12, he took me down to the waterfront and pointed at a Navy ship moving slowly out toward open water and said quietly, "The world runs on what moves through the water." Standing in the Strait of Hormuz in March 2026, I finally did, in a way that changed something in me that I am still trying to name. Here's the first thing that surprised me about the strait. You would assume that ships carrying 20% of the world's energy would be given maximum room, the widest possible route, the most open water. The Strait of Hormuz does not work that way. The southern shoreline along the UAE and Oman is a graveyard of jagged reefs and shallow sandbanks that would tear the hull off a loaded supertanker. A modern oil tanker sits 25 meters below the waterline when full. The water to the south simply cannot carry it, so the only viable deep-water channels run dangerously close to the Iranian coastline on the north, close enough to see the shore on a clear day. Close enough to be within range of every weapon system Iran has positioned along those rocky cliffs. The ships have no choice. They follow the deep water, and the deep water runs next to Iran. I thought I understood what that meant when I read it in a Washington briefing document. I did not understand it until I was actually on the water, watching a supertanker the size of a city block navigate a passage that felt, from my position on a smaller vessel, like a crowded hallway. The scale of these ships is genuinely difficult to process until you are next to one. A single supertanker can carry 2 million barrels of crude oil. At current prices, that is a cargo worth over $300 million. Moving through a corridor 3 kilometers wide, guided by captains trying to keep their hands steady while patrol boats circle at speed and drones track every heading adjustment from the shore. But none of that prepared me for what happened next. On the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes against Iran. What Iran did in response changed the global economy in 72 hours. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy moved to close the strait, not as a warning. As direct military retaliation, IRGC forces began attacking and boarding commercial vessels. They issued formal warnings forbidding passage to ships from the U.S., Israel, and allied nations. And they began laying naval mines in the shipping lanes where supertankers were trying to navigate. Tanker traffic collapsed to almost nothing within the first week. By March 11th, the International Energy Agency announced the largest emergency oil release in its 50-year history, 400 million barrels from strategic reserves worldwide. The United States alone authorized 172 million barrels from its strategic petroleum reserve, 41% of what the country had on hand. In California, gasoline crossed $5 a gallon. On March 19th, Dubai crude hit $166 per barrel, the highest price ever recorded. In India, LPG deliveries stopped arriving at the ports. LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, is the primary cooking fuel for hundreds of millions of Indian households. When the deliveries backed up, the queues at distribution centers stretched around city blocks. Restaurants in Mumbai shut down partially or entirely in the first week of March. Not because of anything that happened in their neighborhoods, because of what happened in a strip of water thousands of miles away. Nepal announced it would only refill half of consumers' empty cylinders to extend national stockpiles. Myanmar restricted private vehicles to alternate days. Japan released 80 million barrels from its strategic reserves, equivalent to 15 days of domestic demand. The system was not failing slowly, it was failing fast. And it was failing because 20 million barrels of oil, the energy equivalent of what the entire developed world needs to function on a normal day, could no longer move through 21 miles of water. Here's what that looked like from inside the strait. The IRGC patrol boats don't announce themselves, they appear. Fast, armed, aggressive, cutting close to supertankers without warning or apology. They carry weapons. They communicate on military frequencies. The message they deliver is not verbal, it is physical. The closeness, the speed, the unmistakable demonstration that they can reach any vessel in this passage within minutes. Along the rocky shore, if you have the right binoculars and know what you're looking for, you can make out the shapes of shore-based anti-ship missile systems aimed directly at the lanes where the ships pass. Surveillance drones overhead at nearly all hours. And under the surface, in water that has historically seen the deployment of naval mines, no captain could be entirely certain what might be sitting quietly in the dark below his hull. Here is something that does not get said clearly enough in the news coverage of this crisis. The countries on the shores of the strait need the energy trade as much as the rest of the world needs the oil that flows through it. Iran is a nation of 85 million people whose economy depends significantly on petroleum exports. The UAE and Oman have built their modern infrastructure, their hospitals and universities and transportation networks on the revenues generated by energy trade passing through these waters. If the strait closes, they lose too. Not just the buyers in Asia and Europe and the United States, the sellers lose their primary economic lifeline as well. Think of it as a group of people all holding the same very heavy, very fragile crate. If any one of them lets go, the crate falls and everyone loses what was inside. Everyone is getting tired. Some are angry. Some are scared. There is something about standing on a small vessel in the middle of that passage with a supertanker moving past you on one side, an IRGC patrol boat moving in the other direction on the other side, the Iranian shore close enough to see individual buildings, the drone audible somewhere overhead that produces a very specific kind of clarity. The ships are at the limit of the navigable channel. The captains are at the limit of their concentration. The military forces on both sides are at the limit of their restraint. The insurance companies are at the limit of what they will cover. And somewhere on the other side of the planet, Linda is at the limit of what she can afford to spend on gas. That the fundamental problem of the strait is that it was designed by geography to be controlled from the Iranian shore. The patrol boats can be deterred. The missile batteries can be targeted. But the water cannot be deepened. The reefs to the south cannot be removed. The channel will always run next to Iran. That is hydrology. and hydrology does not negotiate. The maritime industry is beginning to show the strain. Before the crisis, the war risk insurance premium for a single supertanker transit through the strait was roughly $125,000 above the normal rate. By mid-March 2026, that figure had risen to between $200,000 and $400,000 per crossing, per ship, for one passage of 21 miles. That cost does not disappear into the shipping company's balance sheet and stay there. It moves downstream through the freight rate, into the fuel price, into the cost of every product made from petrochemicals, into the price of flying, into the price of the plastic packaging around your groceries. Energy moves through the global economy the way blood moves through a body. When it gets expensive to pump it, everything downstream feels the pressure eventually, including the number on Linda's gas pump. Every time she slides her card and waits for the click. Here's the part that the briefing documents never prepared me for. The part that lives underneath the military story. And I only found it by getting off the ship and onto the land. The island of Hormuz sits at the mouth of the strait. When you step onto it, the ground is red. Not reddish. Red. A deep, saturated crimson that stains everything it touches. Your shoes. Your hands. The soil is saturated with iron oxide, and the landscape looks, genuinely, like another planet. When the tide comes in, the water carries this mineral sediment to shore and arrives looking like dark ink, like blood. The locals call it the bleeding waves. I stood and watched for a long time without speaking, because some things you have to let land on you before you say anything about them. I thought that was the strangest thing I would see on this island. I was wrong. The red earth of Hormuz Island is edible. The people who live here cook with it. This same soil, the soil that stains your hands, the soil that colors the waves, has been used for centuries as the primary ingredient in a traditional seasoning called surak. Residents collect it, mix it with salt and dried citrus peel and local fish, and create a condiment that flavors stews and flatbreads. I tasted it in a small restaurant near the waterfront, made by a woman who learned the recipe from her grandmother in a line of transmission she couldn't trace backward. It tasted of minerals and heat and the specific character of this place. That was my first real understanding that there was a completely different Strait of Hormuz hiding underneath the one in the headlines. Moving inland through Rainbow Valley, the volcanic minerals create horizontal bands of color across the hillsides. Yellow sulfur against white gypsum, against crimson iron, against pale limestone. Stripes so distinct they look painted on by someone who wanted to diagram the geological history of the place. As if the earth decided to make its own cross-section visible. The Portuguese came and built walls to control this place. They lost it. The British came, then others. In 2026, the same contest plays out in the same water, with better technology, and the same fundamental misunderstanding, that this narrow passage can be owned. It cannot. It can only be navigated. And the moment anyone stops allowing navigation, everyone, buyers, sellers, captors and captives alike, loses. Most of the time. That is the architecture of daily life in the Strait of Hormuz. Not certainty, not safety. Most of the time, you're lucky. Which is, if I am being honest, also the architecture of daily life for Linda in Norfolk. And for most of us, everywhere, whether we have thought about it or not. None of that was what broke me open completely. That came later, in a place I almost didn't visit. But before I tell you about Musandam and what I found there, I need to tell you about something on Qeshm Island. In the interior of the island, there is a place called Stars Valley Sedere Ku in Farsi, the Valley of the Fallen Star. The local explanation is that a star fell from the sky and struck the earth with such force that it shattered the ground and sent columns of sedimentary rock rising toward the sky. The geological explanation is 2 million years of wind erosion and seasonal rain working on layered sedimentary stone, carving it into pillars and arches and deep narrow corridors that reach 60 feet above the desert floor. Both explanations are accurate in their own way. The forces that created this landscape are ancient and powerful, whether you frame them as celestial or tectonic. I went in at dusk and stood in one of the narrow corridors and listened to the wind move through the stone above my head. And I understood, without being able to fully explain it, exactly what those people meant. There is a quality of presence in that place. Something in the stone is doing something. Whatever it is, it has been doing it for 2 million years. The geopolitics of 2026 are extremely new by comparison. I flew by small aircraft to the Muzandam Peninsula Omani territory that juts northward into the strait. From the air, deep inlets cut into limestone cliffs like cracks in old pottery. The water inside them is a green that looks artificially saturated, too bright. These are the Arabian fjords. From water level, inside a traditional wooden dido, the limestone walls rise hundreds of feet on either side, claustrophobic and deeply peaceful at once. You feel very small, not in a frightening way, but in the correct way. The way that reminds you that you are a temporary thing in a very old world. Deeper into the peninsula, at over 6,000 feet above sea level, there is a peak called Jebel Harim, the Mountain of Women. Named for an era when the men went to sea for months and the women retreated to these high, inaccessible ridges to stay safe from pirates working the waters below. At the summit, I found something I had not prepared for. The flat limestone ledges at 6,000 feet are embedded with fossilized sea creatures, coral formations, shell impressions, the remains of things that lived at the bottom of an ocean that no longer exists. This entire mountain range was once underwater. Millions of years ago, tectonic movement pushed the seafloor upward, lifting the bottom of a prehistoric ocean into the sky. I stood there holding a fossilized shell at 6,000 feet, the strait visible far below, and felt a shift that I find difficult to describe. You can read that this place has been contested for thousands of years. You can know that intellectually and feel relatively unmoved by it. Standing on a mountaintop made of ancient ocean floor is a different experience. Millions of years ago, the grinding movement of tectonic plates pushed these seafloor layers upward, lifting the bottom of a prehistoric ocean into the sky. What I was standing on was a vertical graveyard, a monument to a sea that disappeared long before the first human being built the first boat to sail on any sea at all. And the water below this ancient seafloor, the water that now carries 20 million barrels of oil every day through 21 miles of contested passage, has been there, in some form, longer than everything that has ever happened in human history. Knowing that moves from your head into your body, it becomes something you feel rather than something you know. Then came the story that has stayed with me the most. In the elbow of Musandam, accessible only by boat, there is a tiny island called Telegraph Island. Today it is a ruin. Crumbling stone walls, broken foundations. But in 1864, this baking, isolated rock was one of the most strategically important pieces of real estate on the planet. The British Empire chose it as the relay station for the first submarine telegraph cable connecting London to India, the nerve center of the empire's information flow. In one of the most remote corners of the most contested waterway on Earth, the soldiers and telegraph operators posted here endured summer temperatures regularly exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Total isolation. The only way to reach the island was a long boat journey around a particular bend in the peninsula. The psychological toll was catastrophic. Operators began losing their grip on reality after weeks of that heat and silence. The phrase that emerged from this posting entered the English language and is still used today by people who have no idea where it came from. Going round the bend. Losing your mind. Born from a boat journey to an island in the Strait of Hormuz in 1864. The phrase entered the English language and has been used ever since by people who have no idea it describes the psychological toll of being posted to a relay station in a 120-degree shipping choke point. The telegraph cables are gone, but the strategic logic that put them here has not changed at all in 160 years. Whoever controls the information and the passage through this water controls something that matters enormously to the rest of the world. In 1864, that meant submarine cables. In 2026, it means oil tankers and LNG carriers and the surveillance drones that track their every heading. The technology changes, the geography does not. I stood in those ruins and the layers collapsed together. The British soldiers going mad in the heat, the Iranian patrol boat cutting between supertankers that morning, the naval mines in the shipping lanes. Dubai crude at $166. Linda, counting money outside the pharmacy, the same water, the same 21 miles, different centuries, the same contest. The medium keeps changing, the contest does not. In the ancient port city of Laft on Qeshm Island, the skyline is defined not by minarets, but by dozens of tall rectangular towers rising above the flat-roofed houses. These are badgirs, wind catchers, a passive ventilation system developed over 1,000 years ago that is, to this day, the most elegant engineering solution to extreme heat I have ever encountered. A tall tower, open at the top, catches the cooler breeze at altitude and funnels it down into the living spaces below. There is something deeply disorienting about sitting in a 1,000-year-old passive cooling system within sight of the world's most contested shipping lane. Two entirely different relationships to energy, two entirely different relationships to the future. And the same strip of water visible through the window. Down the coast in the village of Qeshm, I heard hammers on wood before I saw anything. This is one of the last places on Earth where large wooden ocean-going vessels are still built from memory, without a single written plan. The Lenge boats here reach nearly 100 feet in length, ocean-capable vessels, built by master craftsmen who carry the entire design in their heads, the curve of the hull, the proportions of the bow, the exact angles that determine how the boat sits in the water and responds to a swell, all of it passed down through generations without blueprints or digital models, no paper, no specifications, no redundancy except the next generation of hands learning to feel the curve of the wood the same way the last generation did. UNESCO recognizes this craft as irreplaceable, intangible cultural heritage. I thought that was the most extraordinary human story in the Strait. The people who carry the design of a 100-foot boat in their memory alone. I was wrong. The real one was waiting further north, in a place that geography seems to have deliberately hidden. But before I tell you about Kumzar, I need to tell you about two more things. The first is the Hara forest, because it is one of the most important things I saw on this trip and one of the hardest to explain to someone who hasn't been inside it. Between Qeshm Island and the mainland, a sprawling biosphere exists that should not be possible by any logic of this landscape. Millions of mangrove trees growing directly out of tidal salt water. At high tide, the canopy floats on the surface like a green cloud suspended above nothing. At low tide, the root systems reach into the seafloor like the hands of something that learned to grip in conditions designed to make gripping impossible. The mangroves filter salt from seawater before it reaches the living tissue of the tree. They are their own desalination plants. Growing a green forest in a desert coast beside the world's busiest oil transit route, sustained by a biological mechanism that has been refining itself for millions of years. Moving through the channels by small wooden boat, the sound of the shipping lane disappears completely. There are only birds, herons, egrets, a kingfisher. The silence has a quality I have not heard in any city or conflict zone I have worked in. And underneath that silence, the mangroves are doing what they have always done, processing what would kill them, expelling what they don't need, growing anyway, in conditions the rest of the plant world would find lethal. The forest is vulnerable. Sitting this close to the most active oil transit route in the world, one major spill in these channels could choke the root systems that took centuries to develop. The mangroves cannot filter crude oil the way they filter salt. They were not built for that. The forest has survived every geopolitical crisis that swept through this region. Whether it survives the next one is a question no one can currently answer. The second thing is a beach on Qeshm Island, a short journey south of Qeshm, where the shoreline does something I have not seen anywhere else on Earth. The sand sparkles, not in the way wet sand sometimes catches light. This is different. The entire beach shimmers and flashes under the midday sun, as if millions of tiny mirror fragments have been mixed into the surface. The mineral responsible is mica, a volcanic silicate that concentrates here because of the island's specific geology. When a wave pulls back from the shore, the wet layer left behind glitters with silver light that seems to be doing something light should not be doing on a natural surface. And in the waters around Hangum, pods of Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphins live in these warm currents year-round. They race alongside small boats, they leap through wakes. They do what dolphins have done in this water for 10,000 years. They do not observe the shipping lane designations marked on maritime charts. They do not calculate war risk premiums. They follow the fish. They follow the tides. The village of Kumzar sits at the absolute northern tip of the Musandam Peninsula. No roads reach it. The terrain makes that impossible. The only way to arrive is by boat across choppy open water. The harbor is small and crowded. The alleys between stone houses are narrow enough that two people passing have to turn sideways. The community has been here for a very long time. And the most extraordinary thing about it is not the location or the isolation. It is the language. The people of Kumzar speak Kumzari, a language that exists nowhere else on the planet. Not in any other village, not in any country. Only here, in the mouths of a few hundred people. Kumzari is a linguistic fossil, assembled over centuries from the vocabulary of every culture that passed through this water. Ancient Persian, Arabic, Hindi, Old Portuguese from trading ships, fragments of early English left by sailors who stopped for fresh water and departed, leaving pieces of their language in the local speech like sediment. It is passed down through speech alone. No written tradition, no dictionary, no grammar book. Linguists who have studied Kumzari describe it as one of the most complex examples of contact language formation ever documented, a linguistic fossil that has survived in this rocky pocket of the world, while the languages around it changed completely. If the people of Kumzar stop teaching it to their children, it disappears. Completely. Irreversibly. The only records would be audio files made by a handful of researchers over recent decades. A language that took centuries of maritime contact to assemble. Gone because the world got busy with other things and stopped noticing that it existed. The rhythms of a community that has watched empires arrive and depart from this shoreline for generations, that has outlasted the Portuguese and the British and every other power that came through, convinced it had finally, definitively solved the problem of who controls this place. Since the IRGC began laying mines in the strait in the first week of March, the waters around the northern tip of the Musandam Peninsula had become dangerous in a new way. Not theoretically dangerous, specifically dangerous. Two fishing boats from nearby villages had hit debris, one from an unidentified floating object, one from something that detonated under the hull with enough force to sink the boat and injure two crew members. Nobody in Kumzar had been hurt yet, but the word "yet" was doing a lot of work in every conversation in this village. Saeed still went out every morning. He had gone out every morning for 43 years. He said, through the translator, that he knew these waters, that he could read the surface, that a mine sits differently in the water than debris if you know what to look for. He said this with the absolute conviction of a man who has never been wrong about the sea in 4 decades. And I believed him. In the way you believe someone about the specific thing they have spent their entire life understanding. But I also thought, mines do not sit on the surface. That is not how mines work. And I did not say that. Tariq said nothing while his grandfather spoke. He sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the harbor where their boat was tied. Then Saeed stopped talking and there was a silence, and Tariq said, quietly, that he had asked his grandfather not to go out last Tuesday. That he had stood on this same stretch of shore and asked him to wait one more day. that Saeed had gone anyway, and come back, and tied the boat, and eaten dinner, and the next morning had gone again. He said, "I cannot stop him, I have tried. He is going to go out until something stops him or until the mines are gone. Those are the only two ways this ends." I asked Tariq what he was going to do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was going to go with him, that if his grandfather was going to be on that water, he was going to be on it too. Not because he wasn't afraid. He was afraid. He said that clearly and without embarrassment. But because the alternative standing on this shore, watching his grandfather's boat go out and not knowing was worse than the fear. That is the impossible choice that the Strait of Hormuz makes for the people who live on it. Not a geopolitical choice, not a strategic calculation. A 20-year-old man deciding whether to get into a fishing boat with his grandfather and go out into water that may contain naval mines, because the alternative is watching from the shore, because the fish still need to be caught, because the family still needs to eat, because the boat is there and the nets are there and the sea is there and this is what their life is made of. And someone 1,000 miles away laying mines in this water did not ask their permission and is not going to compensate them for the days they cannot go out. I watched them walk back toward the harbor together after our conversation ended. Saeed with the slightly rolling gait of a man who has spent more of his life on water than on land. Tariq, a half step behind, hands in his pockets, watching the water. Neither of them looked back. I stood there for a long time after they were gone, thinking about Linda counting money at the pharmacy, about the tanker captain with 2 transmitters in front of him, about the British operators going mad in the heat on Telegraph Island, about all the people, across all the centuries this passage has been contested, who were handed impossible choices by forces they did not create and could not control, and who made their choice anyway, and got on with it, because that is what people do. None of them solved it. The water moves, the ships move, the people of Kumzar keep mending their nets. There is a wisdom in that kind of endurance I don't have adequate words for. The village of Kumzar understood something the capitals of the world keep failing to learn. The Strait of Hormuz cannot be owned. It can only be negotiated. And the moment anyone stops negotiating, everyone loses, including the people trying to take control. And I kept thinking, right now, somewhere in Norfolk, Virginia, Linda is calculating the margin again, wondering whether the number on the pump will let her get to the doctor this week. She doesn't know about Kumzar. She doesn't know about the language that took centuries to assemble and lives in no dictionary on Earth. She just knows the number is too high. And the number on her pump and the net being mended in Kumzar and the patrol boat moving through the strait are all connected, by the same water, by the same 21 miles. On my last evening in the region, a young Iranian man working a beach club on Qeshm Island reached down and picked up a small piece of red stone from the sand. "From Hormuz Island," he said. "People carry them. A reminder of where you are." He held it out. I put it in my pocket without saying anything. He had never been outside Iran. He had photos on his phone of places he wanted to visit. New York, Chicago, the Grand Canyon. We talked for a while about music and food, and what it was like to grow up next to an ocean that carries this much meaning. He never asked about politics. I never asked about politics. We were just 2 people talking on a beach at the end of a long day, which is exactly the kind of conversation that becomes impossible when governments decide to stop talking. The stone sits on my desk in Norfolk now. It leaves a rust-colored mark. If I hold it too long, the iron oxide staining whatever it touches. I look at it when I'm trying to remember what it felt like to understand something in my bones that I had only known in my head before. What it felt like to stand at the actual center of the world's energy system and realize the center looks nothing like the briefing documents described. And every time I look at it, I think about Linda. I still think about Linda. I think about her counting money in her car outside the pharmacy, about that specific quality of quiet fear, the kind that doesn't make the news because it isn't dramatic enough. Just a retired schoolteacher calculating whether she can afford to drive home. That is the Strait of Hormuz at its most honest. Not the naval vessels, not the patrol boats, not the geopolitical briefings. A woman in Norfolk, Virginia, counting money because of something happening in a strip of water she has never thought about on the other side of the world. The systems we depend on are more precarious than they appear. The energy infrastructure of the modern world was built on assumptions about geopolitical stability that are being tested right now, in real time, in 21 miles of dark blue water. The mistake most people make, the mistake I made before I went there, is to think that because a system has worked for a long time, it will keep working. That because the ships have always gotten through, they always will. That because the lights have always come on when you flip the switch, they always will. History does not guarantee continuity. The ocean floor becomes a mountaintop. The loudest market on Earth becomes red dust and empty archways. A language assembled over centuries lives in the mouths of a few hundred people and nowhere else. The Strait of Hormuz has been a contested passage for as long as there have been ships worth contesting it over. It was contested before there was oil under the Persian Gulf. It was contested when it was spices and silks rather than crude petroleum. It will be contested, in some form, after the age of fossil fuels has ended and whatever comes next is moving through those 21 miles of dark blue water. The specific nature of the contest changes. The geography does not. And the fossils at the top of Jebel Harim sit at 6,000 feet, exactly where the sea left them, waiting for whoever comes next to climb up there and find them. The people who live closest to this pressure point are almost never the ones making the decisions that create the pressure. The fishermen of Kumzar did not set the maritime policy of any nation. The grandmother in the wind-cooled house in Laft did not determine the insurance rates for tanker passage. The boat builders of Gurzon did not design the missile systems on the shore above them. They live at the center of the world's most consequential geography, while the most consequential decisions are made somewhere else entirely by people who will never mend a net or teach a child a word that exists nowhere else on Earth. That asymmetry between who bears the cost and who makes the decision is not unique to the Strait of Hormuz. It is the general condition, and understanding it changes how you read everything else. There is one last thing I want to say about the way this crisis has been covered. The news coverage has been accurate. The numbers have been correct. The strategic analysis has been competent and often excellent. What has been almost entirely absent is this. The Strait of Hormuz is a place where people live. Not only a strategic variable, a geography inhabited by communities with histories and languages and knowledge systems that predate the concept of global energy markets by several thousand years. When we cover the strait only as a risk, we describe a real thing accurately. But we describe only a thin slice of a much thicker reality. The bleeding waves of Qeshm Island do not fit into the geopolitical frame. The edible red earth does not fit into the energy security frame. The badgir cooling a room for 1,000 years without electricity does not fit into the military crisis frame. The fossils at the top of Jebel Harim do not fit into any frame I arrived with. And the language of Kumzar, assembled from the debris of every culture that ever sailed through this water and now living only in the spoken words of a few hundred people, certainly does not fit. The full story of the Strait of Hormuz requires a frame large enough to hold all of those things at once. I do not have that frame. I am not sure one exists. The best I can do is describe what I saw as accurately as I can and let you build your own understanding from the pieces, which is, ultimately, what all honest journalism is trying to do. Not to hand you the finished picture, to give you enough of the actual material that you can begin to see the shape of the thing yourself. If this story changed the way you think about the Strait of Hormuz, I'd genuinely like to know what stayed with you most. Whether it was the mines in the water outside Kumzar, the language that exists nowhere else on Earth, Linda at the pharmacy, or something else entirely that I haven't thought to ask about. Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from: city, state, country, because this is a story that touches every corner of the world, and I want to know which corner you're in. The Strait of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide. Yet every morning, billions of people wake up depending on what happens inside it, without ever realizing it. This story is told from the perspective of Marcus Webb, a fictional journalist character created to provide a first-person narrator for this documentary. All locations, dates, events, and statistics, including the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis, the IEA emergency oil release, the closure of the strait beginning February 28, 2026, and all figures on maritime traffic are drawn from verified public reporting. Marcus Webb and his personal experiences are fictional.